Hi friends, welcome to another module. This one is the types of virtual training. Before we get started, I'd like us to go over some key terms just to make sure that we're all on the same page. The first term is training. This is the teaching of knowledge, skills, or behaviors to others. Now, you might call these others learners, you might call them students, maybe you'll call them participants, maybe you'll call them attendees. But the key part here is that training, again, is the teaching of something. And the something would be knowledge, skills, or even behaviors. All right, now that we've cleared that up, let's talk about the timing of training. The first way that we can talk about the timing of training being offered is synchronous. Synchronous means that it's happening or occurring at the same time. It's usually scheduled, it's live, it's real time. You've probably heard these terms, okay? On the other hand, we have another term called asynchronous, and this is training that happens at different times. So whereas synchronous is happening at the same time for all learners, asynchronous is happening at different times for learners. When we talk about training, we could also think about it in terms of the way that information is being communicated. Well, the first way is a one-way path. This is one-way communication. This is what's happening now in this video module. So I, the trainer, am communicating to you, the learner, and that's where the conversation stops. So it's one flow, one-way flow of information from the trainer to the learner. However, we have a more rich, interactive way of communicating, and this is what most of us are used to on the phone or even in face-to-face conversations. It's a two-way communication. It involves a continuous feedback loop between the trainer and the learner, or even between learners. If you have a look at this training compass, you'll see that I've placed synchronous and asynchronous on opposite ends of the compass, and one-way communication and two-way communication on other opposite ends. Now, when we think about the type of virtual training that we offer, usually it's going to happen in two of these four quadrants. The first one is going to be this one, synchronous two-way communication. So this is going to be your live, real-time video conference, for example, using a video conferencing platform. So everyone can see each other. You gather in the same virtual space at the same time, so it is synchronous. And you're able to speak to your learners, and your learners are able to speak back to you. That is two-way communication. On the other hand, we have one-way communication and asynchronous. So this is what's happening right now with this particular video module. So learners are able to access the lesson in their own time so that it's asynchronous, happening at different times. And there's only one flow or one way that information is being sent. So this is one-way communication from me to you, and that's where it stops. But I want to encourage you to start thinking about offering virtual training that contains different components. So maybe you might want to offer something that has a live two-way communication component, but then there are other times where you might think, oh, you know what, I might want to be able to have learners access things in their own time, and I just want to deliver the information to them. It doesn't require a continuous feedback loop. So have a think about that. So now that you've started to think about whether you want to have your virtual training to be live or you want it to be accessible at different times, whether you want to feature one-way communication or two-way communication, I want you to now look at the four types of virtual training offers. The first one is a virtual class. Some might even call this a virtual workshop. The idea here is that you want to simulate training that happens in a face-to-face fashion. So in this case, I would recommend you have one facilitator or one trainer, and you have no more than 20 participants. I really do think the sweet spot is between 10 and 15. 20 is pushing it, but no more than 20 participants. And the key here is that you would like every single participant to access the virtual class using their own device. So I'm not talking about a virtual class or a virtual training offer where the facilitator or trainer is shown on a large screen and all the attendees are watching from one device. No, I want every single attendee or participant to access the virtual class from their own device. Why? Here's why. Because what we want to do is we want to offer and foster rich communication and interaction, right? So we're simulating face-to-face training. So what we typically do is we are going to use video conferencing software or platforms like Zoom, Skype, WebEx, Microsoft Teams. And all of these platforms have different features that you should be using within your virtual class. So for example, there's a feature that has raise hand. So, when you're face to face, you might ask your learners, let me see a show of hands, how many of you have blah, blah, blah. Well, in the virtual class, you can have that show of hands by letting everyone turn on their camera and actually seeing their hands. Or you could have some of the platforms have a feature called raise hand. So you might have them press the raise hand button. You might also phrase this in a different way and ask how many of you have, and you could use the chat. So then in the chat, the participants would say me, or I have, or even make use of a feature called polls. So you have several features that you can use in these video conferencing platforms, and that's exactly why it's best practice for every single participant in your virtual class to be accessing the class from their own device. All right, now the next type of virtual training offer is going to be a webinar. Webinars are really great when you have to present information to large groups of people. Usually with webinars, you have one presenter, but I've seen webinars that have a panel of different presenters. So those are kind of cool. And what you do is that you would ask only the presenters to turn on their mics and their cameras. So all the participants, what they're doing is they're muted and maybe their cameras are off. Now the camera part is up to you, but when you think about how many people you have, I've seen it from 20 people that are attending a webinar to thousands of people attending a webinar. And when you get to those really high numbers, you might have some internet or bandwidth issues. So I would recommend that best practice, presenters are the only ones whose cameras and mics are on. Everyone else is muted and their cameras are off. So then how can we foster interaction in a webinar? Well, that's pretty easy. So what you'll do is you'll use those same tools of the video conferencing platform. So you still have tools like the chat box, you still have tools like raise hand, you still have tools like polling. So again, what you want to do in the webinar is you foster interaction a little differently, but in order to make it more manageable for you as the trainer, you want to make sure that everyone is muted because it's just not going to be possible for you to convey information when everyone else is speaking. The third type of virtual training offer is a podcast. This is what I like to call the modern day lecture. Now, lectures have their place, and I think that a podcast is really good because it's perfect for busy people who want to listen to information being presented on the go. They can listen to it on their commute to work, which these days might be from the bedroom to the living room, but they could listen to it while they are um, doing chores, washing dishes, or cooking dinner. Maybe they don't have a lot of time to sit down in front of a computer, so usually they can access this on their mobile phones. And a podcast is a previously recorded audio of one or more presenters. So similar to a webinar where you have a presenter or a panel of presenters talking about different things, they're sharing information with an unlimited amount of participants. Now, the difference between the webinar and the podcast, not only is it because you can't see the presenters in the podcast, you can only hear them, but there is no flow of communication or interaction between presenters and the listeners or participants or learners. So there's one-way communication. The last type of virtual training offer is e-learning. That's basically what you're doing now. Sometimes you might hear them called online courses. Pretty similar. The idea here is that you have self-guided modules that include short lessons. Now, these lessons could be offered via video, audio, what have you. And some of these modules and lessons may have associated with them assignments or quizzes. And what I want to tell you is that I love e-learning modules or e-learning mostly because they're good for independent learners. That is, those who are highly motivated. Because you don't have someone there encouraging you and pushing you along the way, you have to do it yourself. And the drawback with that is that if you don't have highly motivated learners, many of them won't finish the course. How many of you right now are signed up for a Coursera course and you haven't finished it? So I'll tell you that the key to getting your participants to finish, to motivate them, is to make your e-learning offer project based or assignment based. You want them to have some type of finished work product so that they will be highly motivated to get through your e-learning offer. So in e-learning, you typically have one facilitator, one trainer, who is showing up in the way that I think is a video lesson, and you have unlimited participants. And so your learners can access this information at any time. So this slide is showing you how we can look at those four types of virtual training offers. Remember earlier I said that when we look at virtual training, we typically see them in two quadrants. So this is the first quadrant, the webinar and the virtual class. They contain elements that are synchronous and two-way communication. In the second quadrant, we have podcasts and e-learning. Typically, they are asynchronous and involve one-way communication. Now, you can always vary it up and include some elements of two-way communication in your e-learning or even in your podcast, where you post it on a platform in which there's a discussion forum. So it is still asynchronous because people will post their messages or their comments, but they won't be able to see the comments of others in real time, but they will be able to respond. So you do have that feedback loop. It's just a little bit delayed. So consider offering a discussion forum in your e-learning virtual training. So my question to you, which type of virtual training offer are you going to choose? Go ahead and hop over to the worksheet attached with this. Again, it has all the information about these four types of training, and I want you to make a decision now about what type of virtual training offer you are going to create for this course. See you in the next one.